it basically is the federal system for administering federal gun laws. So the NICS system, if you go to a federally licensed firearm dealer and you go to purchase a gun, of course there's loopholes if you go to a gun show, for instance, then there's a query, you fill out a form, there's a one-page form, there's a query made on you based on your name, your identifying information like your date of birth, your address, to see whether they get a result back, either approve or deny. Sometimes they have to wait a couple days because the FBI has to do additional investigations. But the NICS system just last year began incorporating information on individuals who are prohibited under state law from possessing a gun. And that means that the NICS system, and this is again not really clear because a lot of this is kind of opaque because it's administered by the FBI, but they now have records on individuals who are prohibited under state law from possessing a gun, which means that there are individuals who voluntarily seek inpatient treatment, say in Texas, who would be in the NICS system. And what's not clear is how long their information stays in the NICS system, what rights they have, because right now, under the most recent reauthorization of NICS, which happened in 2007, it's on a 5-year reauthorization, it's going to be reauthorized again this year. There were provisions put in encouraging states with incentivizing with grant money to create relief from disabilities programs so that individuals could apply to have their firearms rights restored and then their information purged from the NICS system. But not all states have this program, and the federal government, ATF, has had an appropriations rider since 1992 that has prevented them from having a program where people can apply directly to them for relief to be purged out of the NICS system, so to have their firearms right restored. So right now we're kind of in an uncharted area where we have increasing regulation of people with mental disabilities, their privacy rights and the impact on their employment and other civil liberties contexts is unclear, although we have concerns as in terms of the potential impact, particularly on people who voluntarily seek inpatient treatment. So I think this is an area we have to watch very carefully because of the unintended consequences, and I think the possibility, if we're talking about public safety benefits, the possibility of deterring people from seeking treatment is a very real one, and that might ultimately make us less safe, just because, again, most violence, including gun violence, is committed from one individual to another who they did have a relationship of some sort. It's not these horrible mass tragedies like happened in Connecticut.
Thank you, and I think consistent with the theme of this summit, the notion of big data, and you spoke of databases, the notion of big data and where medical record information fits in big data, the ability to process information becomes very important. The Verizon issue that you mentioned, one of the commentators noted that if they have your telephone number and just a little more data, they know who you are. And so the question is, do we use our medical records for these kinds of purposes, and what is the impact on them? So our final panelist is co-founder of the law firm Powers, Piles, Sutter, and Verville. James Piles has more than 40 years of experience in litigation, counseling, and lobbying in the field of health law and policy. He's nationally known for his expertise with respect to legal issues related to health information technology and health information privacy. He has crafted major pieces of healthcare legislation in many areas covered by the Medicare Act, and was a principal designer and author of the Independence at Home program enacted as a part of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. Mr. Potts.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the other panelists because I've learned a lot from you today, and I thought I knew a lot when I came in. But I've been in this business for 41 years, that is the health law and policy business, and I've never seen a time when the law was so unsettled, particularly in the area of health information, in particular mental health information privacy. I've worked on the issue of health information privacy and mental health privacy for 25 years. I crafted some of the original provisions in the HPS statute and knocked out some of the provisions that did not protect privacy much to the chagrin of a Utah senator. And I have to be on the side of privacy because my brother is a psychoanalyst, and so I can't live in my family if I don't do that. So, and he is also the president of the American Psychoanalytic Association, which is one of the oldest mental health practitioner organizations in the country. They tend to be the folks, the practitioners who are affiliated with the large academic institutions. And they do a lot of research, including a lot of research into mental health violence. And so we were, of course, horrified by what happened at Newtown. I was fascinated by what you knew and what you were willing to share with us. We felt that, and I actually threw down the gauntlet to that organization at their annual meeting in January and in New York, and I said, look, you all are some of the most thoroughly trained and smartest people in the country in this area, and that brings with it an obligation to make sure we reduce the chances of this happening again. So we took the president at his word when he spoke eloquently at Newtown, and he said, surely we can do better than this. And he said, the price of freedom cannot be this. I've practiced constitutional law for quite a while as well, and I can tell you that the Constitution would not limit us from preventing those disasters. So we do have latitude, and even Justice Scalia would agree with that, who wrote D.C. versus Heller. What we did was we looked at the facts of Newtown. And the reason we did it, and I understand your point about most gun violence occurs not in mass shootings, but I could see what was coming because I worked on the Hill a long time and went to the Hill for a long time. And I could see that there was going to be an effort to try to move legislation in view of the Newtown moment. And Newtown was going to be used, was going to be the impetus for moving legislation. So we felt if we were going to move mental health and gun control legislation, which appeared to be what Congress was going to do, and we were going to do it based on the Newtown moment, at the very least, you could do other things as well. You could address gun violence, gang violence, that sort of thing. But at the very least, you should make sure that it addresses the facts of Newtown and other mass shootings. And it turns out there have been a number of books, a lot of studies, summarizing the commonalities of these various shootings. And we know a lot about them now. One thing that's actually good news is these shooters just don't snap. They tend to build up over a long period of time and build up a lot of rage. They're typically young males. They're typically in rural areas. And they tell a lot of people what they're thinking about doing. It's teachers, peers. So that gives us an opportunity, what we felt anyway, it gives us an opportunity to intervene. And we saw just recently in Oregon, a young man was prevented from blowing up his school because he told a classmate told an adult, and they called 911 to intervene. So he's probably saved a lot of lives there. So that should indicate an approach, is what we thought. But let me give you some facts that we came up with, at least on our investigation. Adam Lanza entered that school, from what we can understand, by shooting the lock off the door. That door automatically locked at 9 o'clock, and he got there just afterwards. He got into that school, and he got off 170 rounds in less than 3 minutes. The police got there in 3 minutes, from what we understand. Police, even if they got there, would have been hopelessly outgunned because he had AR-15 with high-capacity magazines. So the folks, it seemed to us the question was, are you better off trying to find a partial solution to this by controlling guns or by working on the mental health issue? And it occurred to us after a lot of thought that the only person who could have prevented Newtown was not a policeman, not a principal with a handgun, but was a psychotherapist who could intervene before Adam Lanza got to the schoolhouse door. I think that's probably the only thing that could have prevented that. So, and that mass shooting was not unlike many other we've seen over the past 15 years. Other things we found were interesting was the NICS background check system would not have picked up Atlanta. It would not have picked up most of the other mass shooters over the past 15 years. So all of the effort that's being spent on Capitol Hill to have background checks for gun shows and things like that, it's just, it looked like to us, is just adding more information to an ineffective system. And what we did, we heard a lot from other, frankly, other associations that you really can't predict violence among the mentally ill. And you can't tell who is really mentally ill, and you can't, and therefore you can't intervene. We found, though, based on research at Harvard and at UVA, that you can do that. That there are actually, there have been tested criteria for applying to see if someone is likely to commit a violent act, as mentally ill as likely to commit a violent act. Moreover, what we found, if you look back at the shooters in Colorado and in Newtown and even at Columbine, these people were obviously mentally ill. Any licensed, any vaguely trained mental health professional who had seen these people would have said they were a threat for violence. So as the president said, we can do better. But we got to know who these people are, and then we have to decide what we do with them or for them once we know who they are. So we developed essentially a 2 or 3, 4-pronged recommendation. Number one is to distribute to the choke points, the people who are likely to see these people, the teachers and the parents, deliver a simple list of danger signs. Number two, have these people, once the danger signs are there, let them, if you see them, have the teachers then refer these folks to a mental health professional who can then apply nationally accepted criteria for evaluating their threat for violence. Number three, that if they find that they are a threat for violence, then allow, I guess as Connecticut did, allow a temporary short-term period for evaluation with lots of due process rights so these people are not incarcerated or held for very long. But the main thing is to get them evaluated to see if they are a threat for violence. And then finally, it seemed to us bizarre, to say the least, that we have a NICS system, a National Instant Criminal Background Check system, that has 9 categories in it of people who are referred to it. And mental health is one of the only ones that doesn't involve a crime. And it doesn't either a suspected or actual crime. The only other one is if you renounce your citizenship. But a mentally ill person is referred to a criminal background check system. Talk about perpetuating stigma. So it seemed to us at the very least, the NICS system and the approach to the NICS system has to be changed. We cannot continue to report the mentally ill to a criminal background check system. And we also, what we were suggesting is that we then focus down on reporting the people who are most likely to be at risk for violence to the NICS system. Right now, it's over-inclusive and under-inclusive. We report people to that system now who could be institutionalized for an eating disorder, who have no threat for violence whatsoever. So way too many people are being referred to the system, and we're not referring to people who are committing mass shootings. So it's both over-inclusive and under-inclusive. So again, we can do a better job. One of the things that I know our members have suggested they would like to see, and I know we have to tread carefully here, but that is, they say because of the trend in deinstitutionalization, which was certainly legitimate, but it has gone so far that they now can't get someone even temporarily held for an evaluation. So what they believe would be a possible solution is to allow someone to be evaluated and temporarily held if a licensed mental health professional determines that they are a threat for violence. So I'll stop right there. But these are the findings that we came up with working with the American Psychoanalytic Association.
Thank you, Mr. Piles, and again, as with the other members of the panel, your insights are very important. And again, I want to tie this to the theme of the conference. It was raised about family members having access to information and medical records. How do you abstract information from medical records that could be useful to, but at the same time, balance the due process rights issues associated with what's in my medical records versus the community's right to know. And then ultimately, what do you tell the patient? What does the clinician tell the patient about who has access to their information and for what purpose that information can be used? All of these are critical questions, and I'd like Ms. Beer's point about using the caution about using tragedy to drive policy. As was pointed out in Connecticut, the rush to judgment is predicated on those emotions, but then they produce results that have so many loopholes in it that they're not terribly meaningful, and they're over-inclusive because the people who should not be in those databases are. So I would like to open up the panel to questions from the audience.
I'll just try to speak up. I do have a question for you in your proposal. Oftentimes, when we come to try to solve a problem, our approach is a feed-forward approach, where we step forward and eventually something precipitates and drops out. What often is neglected is the drop-out path. How do you undo what you just did? For example, this is the problem with dragnets. So you now have a concerned teacher reporting a student. Now they are now in this feed-forward path. And somewhere along the path, it is decided this student is not a threat. This is now, in the virtual world of data and databases, a permanent article. How do you undo that?
That's a really good question. I think there's a process even in the NIC regs for removing someone's name who, because when there's a background check, there's I think it's a 30-second check, and they have to respond in 30 seconds. And then, as I recall, then it's 3 days. Someone has to then look at that again over a 3-day period. And if they don't respond in 3 days, then there's the person go ahead and buy the gun or whatever. So certainly we would suggest. I hear what you're saying about a trail and an IT trail, but. We think, we've looked at that a little bit, and we think that you can, the presumption should be that someone should not be put in that database until it's clear they should be. But if it's, so if you start down the evaluation process, there should be, that shouldn't go into the student's record. I mean, it may, but it shouldn't. There might be some sort of trail left somewhere that someone can get a hold of, but it wouldn't be maintained in any database.
Electronic, it will be.
Well, it wouldn't be maintained in any database. But again, I think we also start with the premise that what happened is unacceptable. I want to make another point here, which I think is very important. That it was a hard fact that we came on to, which is, it's true that less than 4% of the mentally ill commit crime, but it is also true that almost every one of those shooters was outrageously mentally ill. So we know that, and that's good news, because these are the people who are fairly easy to diagnose. Certainly you would want to build a process so that anywhere along the way, if the decision was made to not refer them further, that they wouldn't be damaged by that. It's possible they could, but in my mind, that's preferable to 20 dead kids.
But in the future, when this child now becomes an adult and in front of a judge, it's up to the judge to decide whether or not this record is permissible in the article. And that is then, it's a subjective thing. per judge basis. And so we are potentially destroying any more innocent people than we are protecting people from dying or capturing guilty people.
Well, it's true that you have to tell someone at the beginning of therapy too, what's going to happen to the record.
Tell that to a 9-year-old.
Yeah. Well, no, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, but we know that all of these mass shooters are incredibly mentally ill, and if we identify someone like that, I think we have an obligation to do something to get guns out of their hands.
Commissioner Raymer actually made reference to a database. Could you comment on the scrubbing of databases that Connecticut uses?
Well, we are trying to establish the scrubbing of the 6-month database. We've not done that yet. Can I take a minute to respond?
Well, certainly. Go ahead.
So I will respectfully disagree. I don't believe that all the mass shooters have a well-known or documented mental illness. I've looked at every one of them because of this. Having somebody in school identify somebody, I think that's really good policy. This young man hadn't been in school in a long time. And so what about all the kids that are homeschooled? And I think we will see more homeschooling. I know that in Connecticut, there was an outcry about behavioral health screenings done or that people wanted to be done in the school system, and people came out in masses against it, and it was not passed. So I think that's one issue. And to reinforce the issue of the amount of gun violence perpetrated by individuals with known mental health diagnoses, and it's 2%. And so I've been doing a lot of talking about this, as you might imagine. So I flip it. 98% of gun violence is perpetrated by people without a known mental health diagnosis. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have one. When somebody with a known mental health diagnosis perpetrates crime, it's 14 times more likely to be in the press. So all of the gun violence that's perpetrated, individuals, in families, that doesn't get talked about as much. It's not headline papers. Now, understandably, something like Newtown is going to be. But again, I have said over and over and over again, it was first said that Adam Lanza had Asperger's. There was no proof of that. Couldn't find anything about that. We know nothing about his mental health diagnosis. Now, as a mental health clinician, sure, I believe that he may have had one, but I will also tell you one of the worst moments of my life, probably no, that's not true, was when I was being interviewed on the radio, for a press article, but then it was quoted on TV when I said anybody could snap. Not one of my smarter statements, but I do believe that there are circumstances when people without a mental health diagnosis, especially if there's a gun in the home, may pull it out and shoot a family member or a significant person in their life without a serious mental health diagnosis in a moment of crisis. So I understand what you're saying about really needing to look at what's in place and what we need to put in place, but I think, again, we have to be so careful about the issue of discriminating against many, many hundreds of thousands of people who have never, ever perpetrated any sort of act of violence and are now going to be possibly put on some sort of registry that, while everybody says it's going to be kept private, I have grave concerns about how private that will be.
Evidence speaks in your favor.
Okay, I just wanted to add to your point. One of the bills being considered post-Newtown in Congress was a school safety bill by Senator Barbara Boxer. And a provision in the bill, ultimately, there was a lot of controversy raised, but it created a national student tip line, which presumably would have some sort of centralized database to maintain it, in which it could be a 1-800 number for anyone, another student, a teacher, someone could call in and report a troublesome student. Our concern with that was, one, if there's truly a danger, shouldn't people call 911? Don't we already have a system to deal with danger? And two, if there is a system created where troublesome students are reported, it tends to be disproportionately children of color, students with disabilities who get put into the system regardless of who actually, which children actually pose any sort of risk. So that's definitely a concern, and that was one of the legislative responses to Newtown. I think we're always trying to find that balancing act, and I don't know if any of us have the answer right now about where we strike where the line is between balancing the public safety aspect and the individual privacy and their civil liberties. But I think right now we're at a point where we were swinging too far to one side, given whatever small benefit we get in terms of reducing future violence, hypothetically.
I just want to use your expertise. Yesterday we learned, and it was news to me, that 33 states sell de-identified hospital discharge data to whoever wants to buy it. And the reporter from Bloomberg got a hold of it and immediately re-identified a bunch of individuals, called them up and read them their health record over the phone. They were obviously pretty shocked. Do you have a professional opinion on whether we should be doing that, or why do they do that?
Why do they do that?
Yeah, well,
Why do
they claim they're not making any money at it, they're doing it at their
I was
cost.
gonna say, one of my clients is telling me the answer is money. Now, what's the question?
It's always money.
Yeah, well, I'll just jump on that if I may. I think it's outrageous, and I've always taken the position that I think from an ethical standpoint or a constitutional law standpoint or just a public interest standpoint, you should have some control over how your health information is used. You should not have to relinquish your privacy simply because you need health care or your family does. So, and it doesn't really surprise me all that much that you can re-identify de-identified information. And I thought what was said in the last panel before we came in here was really interesting, that we're moving towards away from evidence-based medicine, more towards personalized medicine. If that's true, then we ought to be putting people more in charge of where their health care goes. And I think ultimately, having, again, been in this business for a lot of years, I think ultimately we'll do what consumers want. It may take a while, but I think you're going to ultimately see an electronic health information system that does allow for consumer choice. But we're not there now. The last few administrations have just been held down on implementing it first and worrying about privacy later.
Gentlemen.
I was wondering, it seems like there's just too many factors. I mean, what's defined as mental health? If substance abuse gets changed into a mental health disease, and the numbers that you guys just gave for 4% would be, alcohol or heroin or anything else would just be astronomical. So you have those things, and everything that you do is stigmatized, I feel like, no matter what you do. If you say, hi, I'm a lawyer, then you're stigmatized, no matter what you do. Let's be honest. So there's so many things and so many factors. My first question, I guess, is it even feasible? Are we too close to the problem? Is being this close to what's going on and being reactive to what's going on the real solution? Or should we be focusing more on other developed countries like Western Europe and Scandinavia and seeing whether it's a cultural change that needs to happen as opposed to a policy or statute?
Well, you touch on one point, which was the Congressional Research Service just cited in their April report, which was that the NIC system doesn't define mental illness.
Right. The Supreme Court does, and it changes.
Certainly, I'm too close to it. I can tell you. This was the worst event that I've ever been involved in, and I have my own issues with having spent that much time here. So I am somewhat unobjective, and so my remarks, I will say, probably are somewhat unobjective. But I also, just anecdotally, one of the parents that spoke in Newtown, this was not a parent that lost a child. This was a woman from Australia who had researched every state in the nation and looked for what she hoped would be the safest community with the best education system to live in. And as you know, there are no guns in Australia. They passed very strict measures. She got up and spoke, and she was appropriately horrified that this had happened and that she had done all this research for 6 months